Iskahego nohet, imatiosi cherahaf, shuaki chwein, sipewabe, imatiosi cheristani, chere alavuni, shu sipak chwein, utsipetik pabe pari nimalech, tikonik hai, chupan kablachuch bats, Matios Hanila ni Matiosi Chive. Thank you very much for giving us a wonderful welcome to this house of teaching, and I think that it's very important for me to be here. I have a presentation in PowerPoint, but you know that always we change our issue to present because we plan to present something, but with the introduction we have to change sometime some of the issues that we have to say. So I will put this presentation only for you, just for information. But I think that that really I'm going to do is to say that the struggle against racism has been advanced. Probably sometime very small advances have been taking place in the world, in countries, but at least it's moving ahead, the struggle against racism. Of course, racism also has been advanced also. Today, we are going to see that racism has another phases. Has been, people are practicing racism in a very sophisticated way. And I can add a cynical way. New social problems we are facing in the world today. The US, especially the US, is facing a new undocumented migration. We never say an illegal migration because nobody is illegal in this land. It's undocumented, but it's not an illegal immigration. So those kind of things you are going to see not only here in the US, you will see in Europe, especially in Spain, Italy, Greece, and some other countries that are in the south part of Europe. And how you can see the sophistication of the practice of racism. Now, in this moment, there is not necessary anymore to insult somebody, to say racist speeches against somebody or to other countries, to other peoples. Now, only the way that people are seeing other people that are different than themselves is the way that you are practicing racism. And that you can see it in the immigration officers. I went to Rome last week, and we were about probably 200 people entering to Rome. But the only one who was taken aside was myself. The other one, they were white, they were Europeans. But when I said to them that I was going to a UN meeting, they asked me, do you have a letter of invitation? And I told them, no, I don't have a letter of invitation. You wanted to see my ID? And I showed my UN ID. And when they saw my UN ID, they said, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. But because I have my UN ID, if I didn't have that ID, probably they hold me for 24 hours in the immigration room that they have there, especially for the so-called illegal migrants that are coming to Europe. So these kind of issues, that is what people are suffering in this moment. And that is the way that people are practicing racism in this moment. Of course, there have been advances, as I said. Probably some of you know this picture. If you can help me, you can tell me who this man was. Please? No? Nobody know this man? He was Chief Descajen from the Iroquois nation, or the Iroquois nation, the 6 nations in the north part of the US, south part of Canada. He began almost 100 years ago the struggle of the recognition of indigenous people's rights. He was the first international diplomat in the organization that today is called the United Nations Organization. Before of the United Nations Organization was called the Nation Society. 1923, Chief Descajen went to this National Society to ask the leadership of the world to recognize the right of indigenous people of self-determination, to ask them to respect the treaties that they have signed with the English crown. He was there in Geneva 3 years, sitting there outside of the Society of Nations, and nobody heard him until he was tired and he came back to the US. But anyway, that is one part of the history. I put some dates there. I know that there are many dates that I missed to put it there. 1957, the International Labor Organization doesn't have to do anything with indigenous people's rights, but they were worried about the situation of labor in some places, and especially in the so-called colonial countries. Because they hear that a group of people, they were talking in another language. They were not a colonial language. And we have to understand the colonial language, they were English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. They spoke another language. So they started to notice that, and they started to notice that there was a very discriminatory treatment against those peoples. And then they discovered that they were indigenous peoples. And that's why they adopted the Convention 107 of ILO. In the United Nations, they started to be worried about the situation of human rights of all the peoples. And they asked ambassador from Chile, Hernan Santa Cruz, to make a study on the situation of human rights in the world. And he finished his study with a recommendation that he was worried about the situation of human rights of indigenous peoples. But because he was not, he didn't know about indigenous people, he recommended further study on the indigenous people human rights situation. And that's why in 1971, in the Subcommission for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination and Protection of Minorities of the United Nations asked Ambassador Jose Martinez Cobo to do another study, especially on indigenous people's situation in that moment. I don't know what is that song. I don't know if it's myself or I don't know. Okay. And he was an ambassador all his life. And he said to the subcommission, I will do this study, but I don't know anything about indigenous peoples. He said, I don't know anything about indigenous peoples. I don't know anyone who is an indigenous person. The only person that I know that is an indigenous person is the lady that is cleaning my house. And I will do the study only if Augusto Williamson Diaz will conduct this study, and I will sign that study. I know this because I am a very close friend of Augusto Williamson Diaz. He's an old person already. He has probably 93, 94 years. And he's still very clear, have a very clear mind in this moment. I hope that somebody can go there to Guatemala, because he's Guatemalan, to interview him, and I hope to have resources to bring him and to make a film or a tape recording about all his experience that he had in the United Nations. So Augusto started this study. And of course, Ambassador Martinez Cobo signed the study. And that's why the study is known in the United Nations, the Martinez Cobo study. And is the situation of the human rights of indigenous peoples in the world. And that study, the first recommendation that he done it is to implement or to organize a working group on indigenous issues. And that's why, on indigenous population, I'm sorry. And that's why in 1982, we have the first meeting of the indigenous working group, the working group on indigenous population. And in 1989, we have, 1987, we have the intention of ILO to review the Convention 107 because they had a very strong criticism against that convention because it was very paternalistic, was very racist against indigenous people. There was also, they have assimilation policies inside the convention, and that's why they reviewed the Convention 107, and then that convention became the convention, the Convention 169 of the ILO. 2007, some of you probably know, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People was adopted by the General Assembly, 13th of September, and probably you will say, well, that was easy one, but was not easy because it started from 1985 to 2007. Took almost 30 years of discussion among the representative of the state and representative of the indigenous peoples of the world. It's the first time that the subject of rights participated into the creation of a new instrument to protect their own rights. That is very interesting process in the United Nations. 1977. Again, as you will see, almost only U.S. Native people there in that manifestation that came to Geneva to participate in the first international conference on indigenous people's rights. This is very important because we can say it's the first meeting in the modern time that indigenous people are starting to participate in the United Nations. It's the new era of indigenous people's diplomats. And that picture is very historic picture. You can see there all an elder women there walking with them. Many of them they passed away already, and some of them they are still with us. Permanent Forum on Indigenous People issue. I put those pictures there because Oleg Maga was the first chairman of the Permanent Forum. Chief Willie Littlechild was the second chairman of the Permanent Forum, and Vicky Tauli Corpus was the third chairman. And the picture below is the actual members of the Permanent Forum. You will see there the 18 members. I think they are the 18 members there. And they are from Latin America, from North America, Asia, Europe, and also Africa. Representatives there. That is the mandate of the Permanent Forum. I will not read it because you can read it there, but especially what is the mandate of the Permanent Forum is to elaborate and to receive some advice for them to advise the Economical, Social and Cultural Council of the United Nations, and also the specialized agencies of the United Nations to work on indigenous people's rights. And they prepare studies and recommendations. A special rapporteur on indigenous people's rights. That is another procedure, but Rodolfo Stavenhagen was the first special rapporteur. He is Mexican. He has done a very good work for 6 years. The second, probably you know, the academics, they are here, they know him already. He is a professor in the School of Law in Arizona. He's a Professor James Anaya, Dr. James Anaya, and he has done also a very good work for 6 years. This year, Vicky Tauli Corpus became to be the new special rapporteur on indigenous people's rights. Also, the mandate is there. I'm sorry that I am not very good on those kind of making slides, so I move it there. But anyway, that is the mandate also of the Permanent Forum. Expert mechanism. There is another mechanism that the United Nations have on indigenous people's rights. Was created by the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and especially is to advise the Human Rights Council to deal with indigenous people's rights. And there is the mandate also. I'm sorry for this bad slide that I put it there, but there is the mandate. Of course, it's my picture there. And this is the last World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that took place a month ago. And as you will see, there is Tarsila Rivera, is a Peruvian Quechua, and she has been one of the, we can say she's one of the elder leaders of the international movement of South America. We met each other in the beginning of the 80s, struggling against the dictatorship in our countries, but also the people who have been violating the human rights of the indigenous people of our country. And probably you know also Rigoberta Menchú. She is a Quiché Mayan from Guatemala, Nobel Peace Prize 1992. And of course, there is her assistant back in the picture. They took a picture of us because we were one of the, probably not the beginners of this struggle in the United Nations, but we are one of the people who is still there working, insisting on the rights of indigenous people in the United Nations. And that's why when they saw us, they ran and they took a picture of us and they sent it to me, that picture. That's why I decided to put it there, because I think that it's very important to have a historical, not only view, but historical memory about the people who have been working in the United Nations. Those mechanisms that I put it there are those mechanisms that indigenous people had. I always repeat to indigenous peoples that those mechanisms are not for denunciation of human rights violations. They are only bodies they are receiving some comments or advice to advise other United Nations bodies. The place where we have to send our denunces on indigenous people violation of their rights are those that are listed here. There are 9 treaty bodies of human rights. Some of them, they speak about indigenous people, especially in one article. But nevertheless, indigenous people's rights are human rights. And that's why we can use any of this body to denounce the indigenous people's right violations. We have the Human Rights Committee, the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Of course, we have here our Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Committee on the Elimination of all discrimination against women, the Committee Against Torture, the Committee on the Right of the Child, the Committee on Migrant Workers, Committee on the Right of Persons with Disability, Committee on Enforced Disappearances, and the Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Those are the 10 committees that we have in the United Nations where indigenous people can present denunces of violation of human rights. The Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, or the International Convention, we don't have a specific article that speaks about indigenous people's rights. But if you take Article 5, you will see that that article is fitted almost in a perfect way to defend indigenous people's rights. But nevertheless, the interpretation of each article, we have done a process that we call thematic discussion. This thematic discussion have the intention to interpret article by article of the convention. And we are telling the state parties of the convention how to interpreting one article, because you know, as a student of law, you know that each person has their own interpretation of one article of the law. So that's why we say, no, you don't have to interpret it the way that you wanted to interpret in this article. What you wanted to do is to interpret this article in this way. So you have to accomplish this article in this way. Not the way that you wanted to interpret it, because they are saying, oh, okay. So Article 3 of the convention, we don't have any more apartheid in this moment. The apartheid disappeared when the South Africa's regime was overthrown, or they decide that they were not going to practice any more apartheid. But the thing is that still, even that it's not official policy that the states are taking, there are in fact some system of apartheid that is taking place in our countries. And that's why the commitment that the state parties have is to fight and to struggle against apartheid. And that is something that we always are telling the state parties. Look, even that it's true, the apartheid system disappeared, but racism is still, and in some parts of the world, apartheid is in fact. So those are the issues, and General Recommendation 23 of the committee speak especially about the indigenous people's rights. And that's why I mentioned this to you, because some of the convention doesn't speak specifically about indigenous peoples. The right of the child, if I recall correctly, is Article 12, where they are saying that indigenous people's child have the right to practice their own culture, to speak their own language, and to practice their costume as an indigenous child. So some of those conventions speak about the indigenous people's right, but some of them, they don't speak anything about indigenous people. But as I said before, indigenous people's rights is a human rights. And so we have to defend the indigenous people's rights with those conventions here that I mentioned here. And I know that I will finish here, because if not, Professor Robertson will kill me after we finish this meeting. And I have 4 ways to say thank you to you. Matiosh is my own language, and the other 2 is a Mayan language also, and I hope you can understand the last way of saying thank you. Thank you very much.